I had alluded to a friend of ours, Lyle Asher, who is a professor, associate professor, full professor, I don't remember which, of English at Lewis and Clark College, which is right here in Portland, wrote an article in 2018, I think it was, for the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is really the original and preeminent, what are you doing? Okay. Which is the original and preeminent chronicle journal for people in higher ed, mostly for administrators, but many of us who have been academics have been reading it. And he later, because it was behind a paywall, did publish this in Quillette as well. So it's available without a paywall. Let me just walk us through a little bit of what his argument is, and then we're going to show a clip that was sent to us by another friend of ours, Mike Nana, who is doing extraordinary work in this regard too. So one of what his basic argument is schools of education, which are have historically trained teachers of K-12 students, K through 12 students, have no history of excellence. They are famously not excellent every moment that people have gone looking, but that more recently they have begun to train not just teachers of children, but also administrators of colleges and universities, and not just administrators of schools of ed themselves, but administrators across the board. So one of the foundational papers in the so-called scholarship in this realm that has become really foundational for many in schools of education is on microaggressions. And in this paper is so rife with sleights of hand, and so void of critical thinking. It's remarkable. It was written by 7 academics at various schools of education, or maybe it was all at one. And here's just a quote from this paper that Asher takes to pieces. They say, again, this is the foundation, this is sort of the introduction of the concept of microaggressions from, if memory serves, maybe a 2014 paper. Microaggressive acts can usually be explained away by seemingly non-biased and valid reasons. For the recipient of a microaggression, however, there is always the nagging question of whether it really happened. It is difficult to identify a microaggression, especially when other explanations seem plausible. Many people of color describe a vague feeling that they have been attacked and that they have been disrespected, or that something is not right. Microaggressions operate to create psychological dilemmas for both the white perpetrator and the person of color. So Asher quotes this from this paper and says, why is everyone falling for this kind of thinking? Which explicitly pits villains against victims. It creates exactly the dynamic that is pretending to be fighting against. And he says, why are people not pushing back against this garbage? So just one quote here from him. He says, because doing so, why not tear apart such clearly divisive pseudo-scholarly thinking? He says, because doing so would derail a deep nostalgia. Not, of course, for the overt brutality and dehumanization inflicted by Jim Crow and the likes of Bull Connor, but for the moral certainty those evils retrospectively allow for. In some respects, people of color may find an overt and obvious racist act easier to handle. The essay that he's talking about obligingly develops a crude alchemy for transmuting the ambiguous into the obvious. This alchemy is little more than a way of behaving that masquerades as a way of knowing. Act as if ambiguities were certainties, and as if vague feelings were reliable registers of fact. Act, in other words, as if complex interracial encounters, which admit of both mistakes and misunderstandings, are conscious or unconscious acts of racism exercised by a, quote, white perpetrator. That will indeed make things easier to handle, Asher says. One more from Asher. But such ease of handling is the product of presumption and simplification. It would be as if a marriage counselor approached every new couple having decided in advance that the complaints or suspicions of the shorter partner or the male partner or the minority partner were necessarily legitimate, and that the other spouse's objections, prejudged as defensive, were evidence of guilt. Moreover, because these objections would, in the author's pseudo-technical jargon, invalidate the experiential reality of the other partner, that is, offer a different point of view, they would constitute yet another offense. Would anyone expect marital relations to improve under such a counselor's supervision? Would anyone even hire such a counselor? So
you'd be crazy to.
You'd be crazy to. And this, so really, I cannot recommend this essay highly enough. It's so good. And I don't know if we want to go right into this little piece of video, or you want to say some things about what you just heard.
Well, I would agree with you. Lyle has been on this case for quite some time, and reading his work is very sobering because he just cuts right to the heart of it.
Yeah.
Those quotes are excellent and really point to it. But what I'm hoping people will do is they will start to think about what the architecture that is built up around these claims becomes and what it looks like going forward. Because, of course, the thing that you've been saying for quite some time is that as this moves into the schools of ed, it obviously moves into the children, and it moves into the children and therefore cannot help but pervade society, because where do the children go? Absolutely everywhere.